Thanks, General Jeffrey, so much for your time. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for your service. I wanted to say that to you. What is Soils for Life?
Well, Andrew, it's a program where we brought together what we consider to be leading farmers across the country who are utilising new methods of running their properties. That is, by restoring the health of their soil, managing their water facilities properly and managing their crops properly. And what we've been able to demonstrate by utilising these methods, these farmers are able to produce an economic benefit, a social benefit, a productivity benefit and an environmental benefit. And we're doing that because for the whole of the 150 odd years that we've been doing agriculture in a serious way in this country, in broad terms, we've been mining our soils rather than keeping them healthy or regenerating them. And that's true across the world, particularly in Western countries. If we continue to mine our soils and its nutrition and health, what we're going to find is that the soil will eventually give up and we will not be able to feed our population or export the food that we want to export for trade and everything else.
And what are the main roadblocks to introducing this system of land management, particularly in areas with more extreme climates?
Well, that's a pretty good question too. You've got a whole range of issues. One, of course, is getting 120,000 farmers to be convinced that making change is firstly going to make them $1 and that it's going to work. They're very independent thinkers, so that is a big one. The second issue, I think, relates to a number of farmers whose dads are still on the property. They might have handed over to son, but dad's still there and the old methods will do us. The third issue is to a lot of farmers, when it next rains, I'll be okay. So what you've got is about 10% of farmers and 120,000 farmers who are what I call the innovators, the people that have said, gee whiz, we can't continue to go like this, we've got to fix the stream, we've got to get more carbon back into the soil, we've got to hold more water in the soil and so on. They're the ones that we're concentrating on with the case studies. We want to roll those 20, 30 case studies we've got now out to 100 to provide the tipping point then for everybody to say, gee, this is good stuff.
General, you came on board in this program in 2012. How would you describe the challenges in resourcing and funding the program?
Extremely difficult. I think part of the problem that you were relating to in your earlier question is that when I first took this on, I realised not only would there be the issue of convincing 120,000 farmers, there would also be the issue of chemical companies, fertiliser companies, insecticide companies, what I call industrial agriculture. You know, the huge farms, the big tractors, the big combines, growing the one crop, burning the stubble, ploughing the soil, cooking it under the sun, adding chemicals, and then waiting for some rain to make it grow, things grow. Now that by and large has been a pretty big part of our agricultural DNA for a long time. So we've really had to go through an educative process to get a number of those people on side. To do that, you've got to get the government on side because that then gets into policy, and perhaps you talk about that later as you see fit.
Just as a follow-up question to that, if that type of agriculture, that type of industrial agriculture continues in the fashion that you just described, I mean, is that a catastrophe for the soil, for the land?
Well, it will be, because the key thing about managing our agricultural landscape, which by the way consists of 60% of the continent, managed by 120,000 people on behalf of 23, 24 million urban Australians who don't know and don't particularly care. The big difficulty is to get farmers to understand that for a healthy soil, you've got to be able to integrate the management of your soil, the microbial, the fungal, all the little bugs, 7 billion of them in a handful of soil. You've got to be able to get them properly looked after. To do that, you've got to get water into the soil, the rain. That will only get into the soil if you've got the right plant growth and if you've got sufficient carbon. So you've got to manage those three as an integrated package, and that's what so many people, including a lot of our agricultural department people, do not understand. And it's the art and science of integrating the management of soil, water and plants that's key to the whole game.
The Abbott government and the Turnbull government as well, that they often spoke of, or often speak rather, particularly the Abbott government at the time, of reforming Northern Australia into a powerhouse of primary production. How crucial are the principles underpinning Soils for Life in achieving something like that?
Well, I think there are two aspects to that question. First of all, Northern Australia has very sensitive soils. It's not, you just can't say the whole of Northern Australia we suddenly convert to agriculture. That's rubbish. The second point I think to make is this, that unless you look after the soil in the way that we're trying to do it with the case studies, and we've got one big one up there in the Northern Territory already, it will fail. The third point is this, that even if we doubled our food production tomorrow, doubled it, we'd still only feed 80 or 100 million people. If we exported the knowledge that we're generating through the Soils program, we might help to feed 1 billion people. Now that would make Australia relevant in our region and on the planet. And that's what we're trying to explain to government, to foreign ministers, defence ministers, that if we can reduce the risk of scores of millions of people crossing borders because they're hungry and thirsty, as they will be, then that is deserving of support by the whole of government, which would then lead more to support agriculture.
If the goal of an overarching cooperative model of land management is achieved, what will that mean for Australia's security and economy?
Well, the point I've been trying to make to governments and people for a long, long time is that India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, California, specific places, Cape Town, are all in deep trouble, primarily through the reduction of their water resources for agriculture, primarily through the draining of their aquifers, many of which were established over geological time. If we could demonstrate to those countries through the case study program and through policy settings that these things are fixable, then patently it has a big security impact. And that's why it has a foreign affairs impact. Of course, the foreign affairs minister, for example, might say as part of the $6 billion aid program we give out each year, we might do one big one of $2 billion to fix China's rivers or to fix India's refrigeration problem, something that really has a big impact. And if the foreign minister sees a huge benefit in that, she would then be quite happy to see more money going into agriculture. Defence minister, the same. If we can reduce the risk of conflict through social upheaval, then she'll say, right, of my 40 billion a year I'm putting in defence, whatever it is, I'm happy to put 2 or 3 billion into. And so you go through education, all the other ministers, health. So we chop 20 billion off the health budget because kids are going to get healthy food, healthy animals, and therefore reduce the risks of everything, obesity, cancer. So we chop 20 billion off our 180 billion budget a year. She'd be, or the minister would be quite happy to put 10 billion of that into agriculture. So everything is interconnected. And that's the message we've got to get out to the public and the political people.
How would a program like this, in your own words, work between, say, Australia and China cooperating to develop this technology or to implement this technology?
Well, I think the thing that we're trying to do, and we're already linked into the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science, is to demonstrate to them that a case study program is good for every country to do. Having a national soil advocate is a darn good thing, independent of governments, but they can all talk each year. That then goes in the development of these cases. Of course, you bring in the technology, and we spoke earlier on about new systems of underground irrigation, or bringing in educative programs for school kids, or the big one being our incapacity to this point in time in being able to measure soil carbon, broadacre, quickly, accurately and cheaply, because soil carbon is the primary indicator of soil health, and it's the primary ingredient for getting water into the soil. I reckon we need a satellite linked to ground sensors that will tell governments and individual farmers exactly what's happening in terms of soil carbon levels across the whole of the country and across the planet. When we've got that, then we know what the scope of the problem is that we've got to fix.
Water is obviously an increasingly vexed problem for farmers. How can we better manage the precious resource that is water, particularly in those more arid, drought-prone areas?
Well, let me give you a simple example. If you say that on the landmass of Australia, 100 drops of rain fall, 50% of that, those 100 drops, half the rainfall is now evaporating. It's hitting the ground and going straight back up there because it cannot get into the soil. That is 25 times the quantity of water in all our dams, including the Argyle and everything else. And it's 5 times the quantity of water in all our rivers each year is going up there because it can't get in there. So that is the first critical point to understand. We've got to declare our water as a key national strategic asset, along with our soil, along with our plants, to be managed as a national strategic asset.
If you were relying solely on a government funding for this project, for this initiative, where would you be?
I think we'd have collapsed 3 years ago. We got an initial bit of funding from the government to set up our initial case studies, so partly we've had to go to private donors, but we are hoping now that through the policy settings that we've asked the government to consider, that they will now come to the party. Because it's of interest to note that the British government, for example, their agricultural and environmental ministries, which are linked together, are now looking at the management of soil as their primary objective to get a healthy agriculture. So they've ticked that, and what we've got to do is get this government to do the same thing.
How do you go about convincing investors such as Dr. Chow that this is a worthwhile program? How do you get these people on board? Because I can imagine even for somebody with your credentials, when you're asking people for large amounts of money, there'd be a lot of closed doors.
To a degree that's true, but the first thing we've had to do is to get our evidence base right. And whilst we did our initial case studies, they were good. We had to do a lot more work to get that evidentiary process actually agreed. That's taken us about 2 years to do it. It's taken us the time that Dr. Chow, in fact, has been supporting us. But that has now been done. When we get the next batch of case studies up and running, then I think we can go to the big players with hand on heart and say, this isn't guesswork. Here's the problem out there in the world, which our research institute in Perth is dealing with, Future Directions International, which Dr. Chow supports. They're providing the global scenario. This is not good out there. We've got to fix it. Australia, you can provide the examples and lead the way. Let's do it. If we can bring all those things together in a short, sharp, concise briefing to individual people of wealth or companies, then I think we'll succeed. Well, I think the key message to get across, Andrew, is that if we're to save the planet, we've got to save the soil. It's that serious. Turkey's going to run out of topsoil in 40 to 50 years. Run out of it. It's gone. The Nile Delta, agricultural lands are now decreasing by 1% a year. So while it's good to have all these things going about fixing cancer and building buildings, and which is all good stuff, it's all part of it, to me, it's fixing the soil and the water and the plants is absolutely fundamental. How else are we going to almost have to double our food production by 2050 to feed 10 billion people from the 7 billion? It's got to be done through that soil. So my message really is that if you eat, you're involved. And if we don't do something now at our age levels, our grandchildren are going to be very, very angry with us because they're the ones that are going to face this global soil, water and food security crisis.
Thank you so much, sir. Well said.
My pleasure.